Welcome into the EMA Online Video Fast Break as the Wildcats lose 69-66 at home to Texas. K-State with 3 seconds left, a little less than that, in the first half, led by 14. Tyke Green commits a foul. Texas goes to the free throw line. They make all 3 free throws. You're thinking, oh, man, I really hope that those don't end up impacting the game in some way come the end. Well, they did, in fact, impact the game in some way because Texas ends up winning by 3 points. The Wildcats got off to a really good start in the game. Maybe could have even led by more, but ultimately you settle for what was 14 points at one stage. And they were able to hold Texas to 30% shooting in the first half, 11% from 3. Not a lot was going right for Texas. K-State's defense looked like maybe the best we've seen it all season. Quite the change in the second half where Texas halfway through was shooting 70%. It whittles down to 57% in second half shooting. But the Longhorns were a much different team, and they were able to take care of business against K-State in Bramlage.
Yeah, the way Texas came out in the second half, I thought was with a ton of energy. I think I made a point, too, in the second half, Mason, about you could see the energy that Texas had on the bench. Every bucket, it seemed like their entire bench was up, screaming, yelling, hyping up their teammates. And that's something that you didn't see on the K-State bench at all. They came out flat, and it looked like they got punked in the first couple minutes, and then they didn't know how to react. And I thought it was really interesting after the game, and you asked Jerome Tang about his timeout usage, and this is something I think we should dive into here briefly. He didn't call a timeout until the last couple minutes of the game, and he said afterwards he didn't think that his team looked rattled in those first couple of minutes. He just thought they looked unfocused. And I guess you could argue that one way or the other, maybe you want a timeout in that situation, maybe you don't, maybe you want to save it. And Jerome Tang knows a hell of a lot more about basketball than you or I combined probably know. But I thought that was interesting. And then I also thought that the way that K-State didn't call a timeout at the end of the game before the possession where Noel has a bad pass that's intercepted by Timmy Allen, and then that forces the foul on Serge Jabari Rice, which sends him to the free throw line to get a couple free throws, which ends up being 69-66. Texas at that point. I thought K-State should have called a timeout on that possession before. That way they could have set something up to potentially take the lead with a made basket. So I thought the timeout usage was a little bit interesting, and I think it was kind of one of the things that Jerome Tang spoke to after the game, talking about how, maybe he didn't have a great game today either, and those happen for coaches as well, and it's a learning experience. He's a first-year coach, and he hasn't had to coach in a ton of super close games at home yet, so that's something I think he's still kind of learning. Yeah,
there was a lot of finger-pointing after the game by Jerome Tang, half at himself and the other coaches, but also he put a lot of this on his players too, because I think he understands that there's only so much he could have done today. Ultimately, do I think he mismanaged his timeouts in the game? I do. I think you have to use one. I don't care if you think the team isn't rattled, but if they are unfocused, to me that's just as big of a problem as being rattled. Refocus them, or at least do something to stop the bleeding and kind of get into them and say, hey, look, we're letting this thing slip. Like, we're going to be fine. We just got to lock in a little bit more, slow down, make better decisions, because that was the problem. They came out in the first half, or in the second half, and that first possession actually went pretty well for K-State. They looked like they were on their way to a stop. They get a kicked ball violation on Naquan Tomlin, so the shot clock resets at 20. Texas inbounds, and K-State gets another stop, but the Longhorns are able to actually get the ball back and finish easily off of a turnover by Cam Carter. He had a couple real quick there in the start of the second half that led to easy Texas buckets. So I would have used one when Texas is whittling an 11-point lead down to even less for K-State. And then I'm with you. I think it would have made sense maybe beforehand, especially maybe you let it play out, but it was clear that the Wildcats on the floor didn't really have the greatest idea of what they were looking for and what they wanted to do when they came down the floor, and it was 67-66, I guess would have been the score. So those are the things you can look at. But Jerome Tang putting this also on his players, he's absolutely right about that. The players share a lot of the blame, including a guy like Marquise Noel, 0 for 5 from 3 in the game. He turns the ball over 6 times. In the last 8 games for Noel, he's averaging 5 turnovers a game. So 40 total turnovers in the last 8 games. And today he had a negative assist-to-turnover ratio. And that's just not going to get the job done for a guy like Marquise Noel. So there's a lot left for the Wildcats to improve upon. They joined KU and Baylor as another team that has a 3-game conference losing streak. So other teams have had that happen, but it does put you in a really tricky spot moving forward, because Texas is now 2 games clear of K-State in first place in the Big 12, and the Longhorns, they are going to be in Allen Fieldhouse on Monday. If Texas is able to win that game, they are going to get a win that very few other teams in the league are seemingly going to get this year, puts them in an even better spot. So we'll have to see how the Wildcats bounce back from it, because they're going to have to, if they want to win the league, worry about other games, but more so get some of their problems fixed. And we'll see what that ends up looking like on Tuesday against TCU.
Yeah, and I think that game against TCU on Tuesday becomes really important for K-State. Today, TCU loses on the road at Oklahoma State, but TCU doesn't have two of their better players, with Mike Miles not playing, and obviously Eddie Lampkin still kind of nursing and battling that Achilles injury that he sustained a couple weeks ago. So those two guys not playing is something that you maybe want to highlight before the game on Tuesday. The availability of those two players is going to be huge for TCU, and I think they're going to be hungry coming in here for a win. And K-State's obviously starved in for a win too at this point in the Big 12, because they've lost 3 straight and 3 of the last 4 overall.
Yep, time to stop the bleeding for the Wildcats. It's also their first actual losing streak of the season. They've lost 2 games in a row now. So, other thing to note, I thought Keontae Johnson offensively